ASMR video on my channel. In this video, I decided to do something really boring, and that is read from this social psychology textbook that I have. Now, this book put me to sleep many times back when I had to read it for one of my classes. So I'm hoping it'll have the same effect on you. If not, then maybe you'll learn something. So it's a win-win, really. So I picked a section from this book that I'm going to be reading to you. It's about... Let's open it up and see. So, the section that I decided to read to you all today is called The Organization of Self-Knowledge. This book is all about social psychology, and it talks about our own self-perceptions and how others perceive us. A few interesting things, but like I said, overall, it's pretty boring. So, let's get started. Regardless of its accuracy, there's no question that most of us have an enormous pool of self-knowledge. 1 second, I'm going to move the book up here so I can read it better. Regardless of its accuracy, there's no question that most of us have an enormous pool of self-knowledge. Collectively, all this self-knowledge is stored in our memories in some fashion, and it's capable of being retrieved, elaborated on, and used as a source of information and continuity, as well as comfort or dismay. Social psychologists assume that self-knowledge is stored in memory in cognitive structures known as self-schemas, built from our past experience. Self-schemas represent people's beliefs and feelings about themselves, both in general and in particular kinds of situations. Consider the domain of conscientiousness. Each of us has self-schemas stored in memory, representing our beliefs and feelings about how conscientious or not we are. These beliefs and feelings are based on our experiences in situations where conscientiousness was relevant, such as studying for exams or remembering a sibling's birthday. Like the schemas we have about personality traits, other people, situations, and objects, the schemas we have about ourselves serve as more than simple storehouses of self-knowledge. They also perform an organizing function by helping us navigate and make sense of all the information that bombards us every day. In one of the earliest studies of self-schemas, Hazel Marcus hypothesized that if self-schemas exist, then a person who has a self-schema in a particular domain, for example, a schema about how extroverted she is, should process information in that domain more quickly, retrieve evidence consistent with the schema more rapidly, and readily reject information that contradicts the schema. To test these hypotheses, Marcus first identified participants who labeled themselves as either quite dependent or quite independent. She also identified aschematic participants, those who rated themselves moderately on this dimension, and for whom neither dependence nor independence was important to their self-definition. Several weeks later, the participants rated how well a series of traits presented on a computer screen described behaviors consistent with the schema-relevant traits, suggesting that past actions and experiences supporting the self-schema are abundant in memory and come readily to mind. Finally, the schematic participants were more likely to refute feedback from a personality test that contradicted their self-schemas, such as independent participants being told they were actually dependent. In short, regardless of their accuracy, self-schemas serve as a basic unit of organization for self-knowledge and influence our interpretations and judgments of ourselves and the social world. What are the building blocks of self-construals? A social psychologist would posit that a sense of self comes primarily from specific ways the social situation shapes the self. The social situation can be as concrete as the presence of a close friend or a more academically successful classmate. It can also be rather abstract and diffuse, such as norms conveyed by key institutions in one's culture or by members of an important social group, such as one's gender group. We learn what attitudes and behaviors are socially appropriate from parents, siblings, teachers, peers, and other socialization agents. This process happens directly as when parents insist that their children share, take turns, and say thank you, and it happens indirectly as when teachers model appropriate behaviors. By encouraging certain behaviors and providing opportunities for particular activities, socialization agents influence the personality traits, abilities, and preferences we come to think of as our own. Imagine a woman whose Jewish parents took her to a synagogue every week as a child, insisted she take Hebrew lessons, and made sure she had a bat mitzvah ceremony. Because of this upbringing, it's not surprising that as an adult, being Jewish became central to this woman's sense of self. Another way that family and or other socialization agents shape the self is captured by the notion that we come to know ourselves by imagining what? Gotta turn the page. The next section talks about siblings and the social self. What do most U.S. presidents, English and Canadian prime ministers, Oprah Winfrey, Betty Davis, and all of the actors who have portrayed James Bond, except Daniel Craig, have in common? What do Virginia Woolf, Ben Franklin, Charles Darwin, Mahatma Gandhi, Vincent van Gogh, and Madonna have in common? The first group are firstborns. The second are laterborns. What does birth order have to do with a person's sense of self? According to Frank Soloway, a great deal. Soloway has looked at sibling dynamics from an evolutionary perspective and arrived at a born-to-rebel hypothesis. Across species, Soloway theorizes sibling conflict, especially when resources are scarce, is frequent, widespread, and occasionally deadly. Sand sharks devour one another before birth in the oviducts of their mother until one well-fed young shark emerges. Once a blue-footed booby drops below 80% of its body weight, its siblings excluded from the nest, or worse, pegged to death. Oh my god. Infant hyenas are born with large canine teeth, which they often use to deadly effect on their newly born siblings. This is kind of becoming another animal facts video. Sorry about that. Let's skip ahead to the human stuff. Humans have evolved adaptations or solutions to threats to survival, and one such adaptation involves a means of resolving sibling conflict. According to the principle of diversification, siblings develop different personality traits, abilities, and preferences within the same family so that they can peacefully occupy different 1996 studies of personality and birth order, Soloway found that older siblings tend to be more assertive and dominant and more achievement-oriented and conscientious. These traits are consistent with older siblings' more assertive and powerful role in the family. In contrast, younger siblings tend to be more agreeable and they are likely to be more open to novel ideas and experiences. This social self emerges as younger siblings learn to coexist with their more dominant older siblings, and as they find imaginative ways to carve out their own niche in the world, which accounts for their increased openness to experience. Next section. The sociologist Charles H. Cooley coined the phrase looking glass self to refer to the idea that other people's reactions to us, their disapproval or approval, serve as a mirror of sorts. That is, self-knowledge is derived in part from reflected self-appraisals, our beliefs about others' reactions to us. Throughout our lives, we experience overt or subtle reactions and appraisals from others. For example, your parents praise your accomplishments, a romantic partner makes light of your fears, a teacher assigns you a challenging task, your peers laugh heartily at your jokes. Reactions and appraisals like these convey that you're competent, neurotic, have potential, or are funny. In short, we see ourselves partly through the eyes of those around us. The idea that we gain self-knowledge through reflected self-appraisals might seem to suggest that we have little say in how we see ourselves. But the key concept here is that we internalize how we think others perceive us, not necessarily how they actually see us. In fact, our reflected self-appraisals often don't correlate highly with the way other people evaluate us. For example, far more people think they are shy than are actually perceived as shy by others. Figuring out how and to what degree reflected self-appraisals influence a person's sense of self can be tricky. For example, Amy's view of herself as a clumsy person could stem from her perception that her family and friends see her this way and convey that impression to her, but it's also possible that her view of herself as clumsy has been detected by other people who then convey that impression back to her. The way we view ourselves often affects the perceptions of other people, who then reflect those views back to us in a kind of echo chamber. In many a film depicting the social lives of teenagers, you see the teenage characters adapting who they are to people around them. Surrounded by the studious classmates, they readily compare homework notes and share gripes about the difficult tests they had to take. In the presence of the cool kids, quote-unquote, they convey nonchalance about their schoolwork. The chameleon-like nature of the teenagers in such films hits at a deeper and more universal truth, that our social self shifts from one situation to another. This notion that the social self changes across different contexts is consistent with the principle of situationism, and it's supported by abundant empirical evidence. Students who are rebellious and free-spirited in the dorm will shift into a more sober and conventional demeanor around parents or professors. Someone who sees herself as relaxed and outspoken when with her close friends may be shy and inhibited when interacting with a group of new acquaintances. Marcus and Wirth coined the term working self-concept to refer to the idea that only a subset of a person's vast pool of self-knowledge is brought to mind in any given context. Usually the subset that's most relevant or appropriate in the current situation. Thus, for example, notions of the self related to relationships are likely to be the mind's prime focus with a romantic partner, whereas notions of the self related to competition are likely to be at the forefront during an important sports match. William McGuire and Alice Padour-Singer proposed that we also tend to highlight what makes us unique or distinctive in a given situation. To test this hypothesis, they asked sixth graders at different schools to describe themselves. Next page. performance, referring to their recreational activities, attitudes, friends, and school activities. As it turns out, the children defined themselves according to how they differed from their classmates. 30% of the children who were especially young or old compared with their classmates mentioned their age in their self-definition, whereas only 19% of the children did. 44% of the children who were born outside the United States mentioned this biographical fact, whereas only 7% of those born in the United States mentioned that fact about themselves. 26% of the children of the minority gender in their class mentioned their gender as part of their self-definition, compared with 11% of the majority gender. At least in the Western world, what's most central to identity is what makes a person distinct. At least in the Western world, what's most central to identity is what makes a person distinct. That's going to be enough of the reading for today's video. I hope this made you feel sleepy or relaxed you like it used to do to me. And I'm not going to lie, there's definitely a lot of interesting stuff in here. I'm sure you heard a few interesting things, maybe some stuff you've never heard before, some concepts you've never been introduced to, and psychology can be pretty interesting, but it's not for everyone. And if you're wondering why I still have this textbook instead of just renting it at the time or borrowing it from someone else, it's because I bought this off a website where it was cheaper to own the textbook than it was to rent from other places like Amazon or Chegg.com, if you've ever heard of Chegg. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was relaxing. If anything, I'd say it's pretty similar to just a whisper ramble kind of thing, except I'm just reading out of this book, less interactive.